The morning sun poured through the window, painting the room with a soft, golden glow. It should have been a moment of peace, but inside his mind, a storm raged on. Thoughts clashed like restless waves, each one louder than the last. Did I forget something yesterday? What if I mess up today? I should be doing more, being better, faster, stronger. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken worries pressing down on his chest. It was as if an invisible radio had been left on, broadcasting endless chatter, never pausing for breath. The noise was so familiar that it had become the background music of his life. Constant, exhausting, and relentless. But today, something was different. Amidst the chaos, there was a whisper, gentle, almost imperceptible. It wasn't a thought or a memory, but a feeling, a calling from deep within. It was the faintest longing for quiet, for a moment of stillness where the noise would stop and all that remained was silence. He had ignored this feeling before, pushing it aside with distractions and busy schedules. But this time it was louder, a pull he couldn't shake, as if something inside him was pleading, "There's more to life than this endless noise." He looked out the window, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. In that brief moment, he felt the stirrings of something he couldn't quite name, a deep knowing that beyond the clutter of thoughts and worries, there was a different way to live. And though he didn't understand it fully, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to find out. The call of silence had been heard, and he was finally ready to listen. As he stepped into the day, the world around him seemed quiet compared to the relentless noise inside his head. The inner voice followed him like a shadow, narrating, judging, analyzing every little thing. "You should have woken up earlier. Why didn't you handle that better yesterday? They probably think you're not good enough." It was a voice that never stopped talking. From the moment he opened his eyes to the second he drifted off to sleep, it was there, a ceaseless commentary on his life. The voice was never satisfied. It had opinions about everything. His choices, his flaws, his future. Even in the simplest moments, it found a way to turn peace into doubt. At breakfast, as he poured coffee into his cup, the voice whispered, "You're wasting time. You should be doing something productive." When he saw his reflection in the mirror, it was quick to point out imperfections. "You look tired. You're not doing enough." He went through his day with the voice as an unwanted companion. It replayed old conversations, imagining how he could have responded differently. It created future scenarios, predicting problems that might never happen. It questioned his every move, filling him with a constant undercurrent of worry and self-doubt. No matter how busy he kept himself, the voice was always there, like a radio station he couldn't turn off. And although it spoke with authority, it wasn't a kind voice. It carried the tone of a harsh critic, convinced that everything needed to be fixed, improved, or controlled. By the end of the day, he was exhausted, not just from his work, but from the endless dialogue in his mind. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized that this voice had been controlling him for as long as he could remember. And yet, he wondered, was this really the voice of truth, or was it just a prison of words, a loop that kept him from finding any real peace? The whisper of silence called to him again, a reminder that perhaps, just perhaps, there was another way to be, a life where the noise no longer had the final word. That night, as he lay awake in the darkness, he listened, not to the world around him but to the voice within. It spoke relentlessly, offering criticism, replaying the past, forecasting the future. It had opinions on everything, as if it was the ultimate authority over his life. "You're not doing enough. You'll never figure this out. What if you fail?" But then, amidst the noise, a question surfaced from somewhere deeper. If I'm the one listening, then who is speaking? It was a question so simple, yet it unraveled something profound. He was aware of the voice, which meant there was a part of him that was separate from it, a part that observed it all. The thoughts, the worries, the judgments, they were there, but they weren't him. He watched the voice in action, like someone watching a storm rage outside a window. He saw how it created scenarios out of nothing, how it latched onto fear and doubt, spinning them into stories that felt so real. And yet, those stories were just that, stories. The voice insisted it was him. You are what you think. You are these fears. You are these doubts. But as he observed it more closely, he began to feel the truth. That voice was like an actor on a stage, but the audience, the one who watched, the one who listened, was his real self. He felt a flicker of freedom as he realized this voice was not the ultimate truth of who he was. It was loud, persistent, and convincing, but it wasn't him. Beneath the voice, there was a quiet presence, a deeper awareness that remained untouched by the chaos. For the first time, he felt the power of that presence, a place within him that could observe without being swept away. If I'm not the voice, then who am I? The whisper of silence grew stronger, and he understood that discovering that presence was the beginning of something new, something real. Early in the morning, he stepped outside, drawn to a quiet place by the water. The air was crisp, and the lake stretched out before him like a sheet of glass, calm, clear, and perfectly still. There was something mesmerizing about that stillness. It reflected the sky above like a flawless mirror, capturing the delicate colors of dawn. As he gazed at the lake, he realized it was a reflection of what his mind could be. Calm, open, and clear. But then, he picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the water. Instantly, ripples spread across the surface, distorting the perfect reflection into chaos. The peaceful mirror was shattered, replaced by movement and confusion. He thought about how often his mind felt like that. A constant stream of thoughts, worries, and judgments creating ripples that disturbed the natural stillness beneath. Every time the voice in his head replayed a painful memory or imagined a future problem, it was like throwing another pebble into the lake. The reflection of peace became twisted, fragmented, impossible to recognize. In that moment, he understood something powerful. The lake's natural state was calm. It didn't have to fight to be still. When nothing disturbed it, it simply reflected the sky with effortless clarity. His mind was the same. Beneath the endless ripples of thought, there was a place of natural stillness, a place untouched by the noise. He stood there, watching as the ripples began to settle. Slowly, the water became calm again, and the reflection returned. He realized that he didn't need to silence his mind by force. He only needed to stop throwing pebbles, to let the voice be without feeding it, without reacting to it. This was the key to allowing the stillness beneath to emerge. He felt a sense of quiet possibility, as if he'd stumbled upon a truth that could change everything. The lake was a mirror, not just for the sky, but for the peace he'd been searching for all along. Later that day, as he went about his routine, he felt a heaviness, a familiar weight that settled in his chest. It wasn't physical, but it was as real as anything he could touch. It was the silent ache of worry, regret, and fear, a tension that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He'd carried it for so long that it felt like part of him, an invisible burden woven into his very being. It was the weight of all the times he'd felt not good enough, the unspoken fears of failure, and the silent pain of things left unsaid. He called it stress, anxiety, pressure, but now he began to sense it was something more. He came across the idea of the body of suffering, a concept that described exactly what he felt, a collection of past pains, unresolved emotions, and stories that his mind replayed over and over. It was like a shadow that grew heavier each time he identified with those thoughts and feelings. Every time he relived a painful memory or imagined the worst-case scenario, it was as if he was feeding that body of suffering, giving it more power, more weight. He saw how it would come alive during moments of stress. If someone criticized him, the body of suffering would flare up, reminding him of every past hurt. If he faced uncertainty, it would whisper doubts, fueling fear and tension. But now he saw it for what it was, a pattern, an accumulation of pain that he'd mistaken for himself. It wasn't who he truly was, but rather an echo of the past, kept alive by the voice in his mind. He took a deep breath and allowed himself to observe that heaviness without judgment. It was uncomfortable, but he didn't try to push it away. He just watched it, as he'd watched the ripples on the lake, and something unexpected happened. The weight began to feel lighter. He realized that by simply observing the body of suffering, without feeding it, without resisting it, he was loosening its hold. It was like standing in the presence of a storm and realizing that he was not the storm itself, but the calm center within. This understanding was a quiet revolution. He didn't have to be trapped by the pain of the past or fears of the future. The body of suffering was real, but it wasn't who he was. And the moment he stopped identifying with it, it began to lose its power. It was the first glimpse of freedom from a weight he'd carried for far too long. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat alone in the fading light. He closed his eyes not to escape, but to face whatever arose within. The endless chatter of his mind was still there, the familiar loop of worries, doubts, and judgments. But instead of trying to silence it, he chose to simply listen. He allowed each thought to rise and fall, like leaves floating down a stream. He didn't cling to any of them, nor did he push them away. For the first time, he became the observer, the silent presence behind the noise. Gradually, something shifted. There was a pause between one thought and the next, a fleeting moment of pure stillness. It was like the hush that follows a storm, a quiet, spacious feeling that filled the room. In that brief silence, there was no fear, no doubt, no weight of the past or worry for the future. There was only the present moment, open and infinite. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of presence, a deep sense of peace that he had never felt before. For a heartbeat, he experienced what it meant to be free from the constant voice in his mind. He realized that beneath the noise, this stillness had always been there, patiently waiting for him to notice it. The experience was so simple, yet so profound. It wasn't something he could hold on to, and soon, thoughts began to return. But now, he knew that silence was possible, that there was a place within him untouched by the chaos of his mind. He opened his eyes, and the world seemed a little brighter, a little clearer. The air felt fresher, and the colors of the twilight sky looked more vivid than ever before. He understood now that this silence was not something distant or unreachable. It was part of who he was, an inner refuge that he could return to again and again. And as he walked home under the stars, he carried that first taste of silence with him, a quiet reminder that beyond all the noise, peace was always waiting. The next morning, he woke up feeling a quiet determination. He had tasted that stillness, and he wanted to return to it. But as the day unfolded, he quickly discovered how challenging it was to stay anchored in that space of peace. As he moved through his routine, the voice in his head grew louder. It commented on everything, from the way he looked to the work he needed to finish. "You're already behind. You could have done that better. Why can't you stay calm?" He tried to observe the thoughts as he had the night before, but the urge to react was overwhelming. He found himself swept up in frustration, wanting to silence the voice or push it away. The harder he tried to find the stillness, the more elusive it became. During a quiet moment, he paused and took a deep breath. He remembered the lake, the way it returned to stillness by simply allowing the ripples to settle on their own. Maybe he was trying too hard, fighting the noise instead of letting it be. So he made a choice to observe without judging. When a critical thought appeared, he noticed it and let it drift away, like a cloud passing through the sky. When a worry tried to pull him in, he acknowledged it without getting lost in its story. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the voice grew impatient, insisting that he wasn't doing enough, that he needed to control everything. But he kept returning to the role of the observer, watching the mind's chaos without reacting to it. In the midst of the struggle, he glimpsed moments of freedom, small, precious spaces between the thoughts. These moments were brief, but they carried a quiet strength, a reminder that he wasn't powerless against the noise. He realized that observing without reacting was an act of gentle courage. It was about accepting the mind's restlessness while standing apart from it. It was learning to watch the storm without becoming the storm. By the end of the day, he felt a subtle shift within, a resilience that hadn't been there before. Though the voice was still present, it had lost some of its power. He was beginning to understand that peace wasn't about controlling the mind but about learning to let it be. And beneath it all, the silence waited, steady and patient, like the calm at the center of a whirlwind. He knew that with practice, he could return to that place more often, finding refuge in the simple act of being the watcher. One quiet afternoon, he sat beneath the shade of an old tree, the sunlight filtering through its leaves. The gentle rustle of the branches and the whisper of the wind created a natural symphony of calm. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the day begin to dissolve. There was no goal, no intention to fight the thoughts in his head. He let them rise and fall, like waves on an endless shore. He remained the watcher, observing without judgment or resistance. Slowly, he became aware of something deeper, a presence beneath the noise, a space untouched by thought. It was not emptiness, but a quiet fullness, a sense of being that had no need for words or explanations. This presence was steady, unchanging, and infinitely gentle. He felt as if he had stepped beyond the surface of his mind and touched a deeper layer of himself. In that space, there was no striving, no fear, no story. There was only presence, a silent awareness that watched everything with calm acceptance. It felt like meeting an old friend who had always been there, waiting patiently behind the noise. This presence was not separate from him. It was him, the truest part of who he was, beyond the restless mind and fleeting emotions. For a brief, eternal moment, he experienced what it was like to simply be. He felt a sense of belonging, as if he had come home to himself. He opened his eyes, and the world looked different, though nothing had changed. The colors were more vivid, the sounds clearer. The simplest details, the texture of the grass, the warmth of the sun, held a quiet magic. The silent presence was still there, like a gentle flame that couldn't be extinguished. He realized that this was what he had been seeking all along. Not a life without thoughts, but a life lived from this place of silent awareness. The voice in his mind was still present, but it no longer had the same power. He knew now that it was only a ripple on the surface, while he was the depth beneath it, the presence that watched, eternal and unshaken. He understood that he could return to this presence anytime. It was not something he had to earn or achieve. It was always there, waiting for him to notice, as natural as breathing. In that moment, he knew he had found a place of true freedom, a refuge that no chaos could touch, and he carried that silent presence with him, like a quiet light that would guide him through whatever life brought. In the days that followed, he began to live from that place of silent presence. There were moments when the voice in his mind grew loud, pulling him into old patterns of worry and doubt. But instead of fighting it, he chose a different path, acceptance. He noticed how the voice would say things like, "You're not good enough," or "You'll never figure this out." In the past, he would have tried to silence it or argue back. Now, he simply allowed the voice to be there. He acknowledged its presence without feeding its energy. There was a gentle power in this acceptance. By letting the thoughts exist without reacting to them, he noticed that they lost their intensity. They came and went like passing clouds, unable to disturb the stillness beneath. Acceptance didn't mean he agreed with everything his mind said. It meant he stopped resisting reality. When frustration arose, he let it be there. When fear appeared, he didn't push it away. He met each emotion with openness, as if saying, "You're allowed to be here. I see you." He began to see that every thought, every feeling was like a wave rising in the ocean of his awareness. Instead of being swept away, he stayed anchored in the present, watching each wave rise and fall. This acceptance brought a quiet transformation. The grip of anxiety loosened. The weight of old regrets grew lighter. Even the voice of self-criticism softened, like a storm that no longer had the power to shake him. He understood that peace was not about controlling life or eliminating negative thoughts. It was about embracing life as it was, moment by moment. When he stopped resisting, he found a deep sense of ease, an inner space where he could rest, even in the midst of chaos. He realized that true strength came not from fighting the storm, but from standing calmly in the center of it, allowing everything to be as it was. In that space of acceptance, he discovered a new kind of freedom, one that was rooted in the present, grounded in the simple act of being. The transformation was quiet but profound. He no longer felt like a prisoner of his thoughts. He was the observer, the presence behind the noise, the one who could meet life with openness and grace. And in that acceptance, he found something he'd been searching for all along. A peace that no circumstance could take away, a freedom that came from within. One morning, as he stood beneath the golden light of dawn, a sense of quiet presence filled him completely. It wasn't a fleeting feeling or a passing moment. It was a knowing, a deep recognition that he had finally found his way home to himself. He no longer felt like a passenger lost in the currents of thought. He was the stillness beneath, the unwavering presence that watched life unfold with open acceptance. There was no need to chase peace. It was already here, rooted in the quiet of his heart. The voice in his mind still appeared, whispering worries, judgments, and plans. But it was no longer a prison, no longer a force that defined his experience. It was like distant waves on the surface of the ocean, while he remained anchored in the depths, untouched by the noise above. Each day felt like a rebirth into simplicity. He moved through the world with a newfound lightness, no longer burdened by the weight of constant analysis. He noticed the subtle magic in ordinary moments, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the laughter of strangers, the way leaves danced in the breeze. He was no longer chasing after a future moment where everything would be perfect. Instead, he embraced the fullness of now, living in the present with a gentle awareness. In this state, even life's challenges were met with grace, not because they were easy, but because he faced them from a place of quiet strength. He understood now that true freedom was not the absence of thought, but the ability to rest as the silent presence behind it. It was living in harmony with life, rather than trying to control it. With each passing day, he carried that quietude with him like a secret flame, a source of peace that no storm could extinguish. And as he looked out at the world, he felt an unshakable connection to everything around him, as if the boundaries between himself and life had faded away. In that quiet, he found the truth. He was not separate from the flow of life. He was life, aware, present, and deeply alive. This was not the end, but a beginning, a rebirth into a way of being that was simple, natural, and free. He knew there would still be noise, still be moments of chaos, but now he had found the stillness beneath it all, a place where he could always return, no matter what. He had discovered the quiet strength of being, a freedom that lay beyond the voice in his head. And in that rebirth, he felt the quiet whisper of life itself, calling him forward, an invitation to live fully, deeply, and authentically in the beautiful silence of now.